Aí me avisa.
Shall I? No.
No,
we're live now.
We are live now? Okay. So, 1 second here. Yes. Bom, boa tarde, gente. Bem-vindos a mais um seminário do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Ecologia da UFRJ. Hoje a gente tem o professor Marco Moretti. Ele é pesquisador sênior da área de Biodiversidade e Biologia da Conservação do Instituto Federal de Investigações da Suíça. Ele tem interesse geral na modelagem do efeito espaço-temporal das mudanças ambientais na biodiversidade, plantas e animais, guildas tróficas e diferentes tipos de fatores de estresse, como, por exemplo, a urbanização. E busca a relação entre biodiversidade, características funcionais da comunidade e funcionamento do ecossistema. Desde 2005, ele trabalha e coordena projetos sobre biodiversidade urbana, diversidade funcional e funções dos ecossistemas, como, por exemplo, o projeto sobre o papel das árvores urbanas para a biodiversidade e a provisão de serviços ecossistêmicos, ou também o projeto chamado Jardins Melhores, que investiga quais fatores influenciam os jardineiros na tomada de decisão de manejo dos seus jardins e quais efeitos e método de manejo tem tanto na qualidade de vida dos jardineiros como dos moradores da cidade, na biodiversidade e na qualidade do solo também. E eu queria também destacar a publicação recente do livro intitulado Handbook of Trade-Based Ecology, From Theory to Our Tools, que em português é alguma coisa como o Manual de Ecologia baseada em características funcionais, da teoria às ferramentas do R, que ele é coautor junto com o professor André Dias, né, do PPGE, no qual apresenta uma guia acessível que oferece os principais conceitos e ferramentas na ecologia baseada em características, cobrindo diferentes níveis tróficos e tipos de organismos também. Então, eu vou passar agora para o inglês, que a palestra vai ser em inglês. Então, Marco, welcome. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you very much, André, for the invitation to contact Marco and so on. And thank you very much. And the floor is yours. You can start when you are ready.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here, or to be here. I mean, to be here in Switzerland, but I think the one positive aspect of the pandemic is that we discovered this fantastic tool that make us more close, especially if we don't have to fly. And I'm sure we will be able to mix a bit these techniques. Of course, meeting in person is always the best, but also a bit concerned about flying and so on and so forth. So I try to share the screen. Let's see if I manage. I think it was this one. Try. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I choose this build of Escher that transform. I mean, the city is like standing in transformation. So, oops. But, oh my goodness, why? Okay, I tried to put the volume down so that it doesn't disturb. Because here is like a time for dinner and maybe people trying to reach parents during the, okay. So, yes, so I will talk about community assembly rules in cities from theories, example, and some perspective. And I mean, I try to combine my origin, which is more like a trade-based ecology, but more like in natural ecosystem, try to apply them in cities. And also the biodiversity ecosystem function relationship, I mean, it's something that fascinated me and see whether I can use this knowledge and apply in urban ecosystems. So, okay, now I have the same problem as before. Okay, so you might be familiar with the graph like this. It shows do you see my mouse if I use it as a, okay?
Yes.
okay, it shows the decrease of population in rural area and the parallel increase of population in urban. So we are now more or less globally 55% of the population live in urban, and we reached the middle point around 2008. In the US was already much earlier, and of course the in the future we will be more and more. There will be more and more people living in cities. So this is something familiar. So this is a map again. Despite the fact that the urbanization is only covering 5% of the surface of the area, I mean there are, as I said, more than 50% people living in cities. The really mega cities are the red dot, and you can see that also this there is not homogeneously distributed. So there are areas like both America where the amount of people living in cities is more than 70%, and area like Africa where we are still below 50%. But consider the amount of mega cities, we can expect this will increase dramatically in the next decades. And land use change was always seen as the most important driver of biodiversity. And of course, when you see city like this is totally land use change. I mean, we cannot deny that urbanization, especially in this condition, reduced biodiversity. So, but we are not here criticizing urbanization. We are not here comparing pristine versus urban. This has been done in the 70s. We're here to understand this new ecosystem and how we can improve it or just understand it. So, of course, urbanization has often occupied the best places where hotspot of biodiversity, because of developing a cities along a shore or along a river gave in the past, also today, possibility to trade. And this, it's no surprise that nowadays you found a lot of biodiversity because naturally these are hotspot of biodiversity, and there are also remaining spots that provide this biodiversity. So there is a huge responsibility also towards this legacy regarding biodiversity. And the challenge, the effects of biodiversity, are quite a lot. One of the most visible is the habitat loss and fragmentation. Then we have heat islands. Here, an example of Zurich, where in the surrounding you have a cool temperature, and then when you move in the city, you have this heating effect through the accumulation of the heat during the day and back in the night. Then you have the light and air pollution, and in many cities you have also the problem with the invasive species. This Trachycarpus might not invade invasive in the south. But in Switzerland, and then it escaped from the garden into the forest. So these are a bit the challenge, but of course also urban environment also get global effect of global drivers. So and so this speak for to have more resilient cities, and resilient cities go also through to have more biodiversity and more functional biodiversity. So, and of course, cities are not only a compilation of problems. This is also a space where we live, where we socialize, where we work, where we reproduce, where we educate our children. So it must have a big importance in our life and in the attention of science and policy. So therefore, it can also be very beautiful, it can be also very diverse. So it's a mosaic of habitat, mosaic of structure. And I mean, it's been shown many times that it's also high proportion of biodiversity and ecosystem processes. And this is also our responsibility, that these processes can continue. We don't know what happens with the cities. We don't know. So maintaining like a functional ecosystem, even if it is urban, is very important. And of course, it also provides services. And Nuria knows about this because I mean, having studied maybe pollution mitigation or temperature mitigation, it can provide really a big service. So facing like outside cities, often the landscapes looks like this. So intensification of the agriculture. So in this context, cities could provide even much better solution. And we have seen that in Switzerland, it also hosts threatened species, rare species, and even new species for Switzerland. So not only invasive or exotic species, but also species that were not found for decades or 100 years. So this is our responsibilities. And now, and also it was also already proved also with the data and quantitative data that cities could be hotspot for threatened species, or cities are refuge for insect pollinators. And we have to start from here and be positive in this respect. So say that the goal of the talk today is try to understand some of the mechanisms that drive biodiversity and species assemblage in cities and possible effect on ecosystem function. So the mechanism. So the mechanism for you might straight away ring a bell and say, okay, these are traits. And I will try to answer the following question. How do species assemble in cities? Which species are they? Why those species and not others? And how it works? Does it work? And as I said before, I'm going to start with few theories and concepts. I will provide few examples and some perspective for the future. So you might be also familiar with the species assemblage rules, which try to understand or to explain, at least when you have like a global species pool or regional species pool, and then you observe in a certain place, like a local communities, what are the steps in between, so that from a regional species pool, I can only observe certain species in a certain place. And usually this is represented through a hierarchical series of filters. Okay, this is maybe concerned global. When you have like the global species pool, then you have speciation, extinction, and migration. But as soon you have like the regional species pool and your local community is in a given habitat or ecosystem like cities, then you have like these species have to enter in this ecosystem in order to be sampled here. So there is like a dispersal ability involved. If I'm not able to move, I mean, I might not be able to colonize a certain place. And then there are a series of habitat filtering, biotic, and this makes that these species are found in a certain place because they have overcome all this filtering and competition and so on. So this is the classical theories. Then these have been also presented in a more continuous way and not hierarchical. It's not that one thing comes after the other. Usually it's like something happening at the same time. I like more this representation, but basically it's the same. And if you consider, and then of course, in the center of all these are the response rates, because they have to respond to all these stimulus, the filtering, the dispersal, all these we call them response rates. And imagine like a a bug, like a bees or birds or something that was found in a community, it has to be able to enter. So dispersal is maybe the most important. Then in cities, all these abiotic filters we have been seen before, so fragmentation, habitat loss, these heat islands, the light pollution, all these are filters that if you are not able, or if you don't have the response traits, the right traits to respond to this driver, you might not be able, and you are outcompeted. And then we have seen by looking at these drivers, by these determinants, we often have a lot of stochastic events in cities, which are not explained. But if you consider plants instead of animals, then, of course, the mechanism and the things are more or less the same, but we have a much bigger component, which is the assisted migration by people. So people here play a huge role in moving stuff, in selecting, choosing, preferring plants, and not these plants and not the other plants. And this will, reduce a bit the importance of of natural disturbance, because you can import plants that do not belong in any sense to the environment. You can, if it's like a drought resistant or is not drought resistant, you can water in them. You can really found, and maybe this is part of the stochasticity. So what people select, what people prefer, and of course also the other. All the insects, all the organisms that interact with the plants might more respond to this selection by people, to this assisted migration, than other factor that we are used to observe in a more pristine habitat. And then, of course, the facilitation. You can remove stuff you don't like, you can facilitate other. So all these biotic filters might be reduced by the fact that human, can really manage or put together plants that usually would compete, but they like them together, and they will make everything possible to make them living together. So this is the way I see that this ecosystem works a bit different than others. So in this way, so the stochastic event then start to be reduced if you start also to understand these additional factors, which are the social ecological factors. And so now I present an example. So we have been working in Zurich, in the city of Zurich, for many years, maybe now 15. And through different projects, we realized that we start to have like a really nice data set, which includes sampling in allotment gardens, in private gardens, in parks, in brownfields, and in green roofs. And this is already it covers quite a lot of different urban green spaces in cities. So we try to define the species pool, the regional species pool in Switzerland. And this is really a huge debate. How do you define it? We use a method which shouldn't imply any subjectivity. So our method was like, okay, we divided Switzerland in square kilometers, and every time we found a species in the cities of Zurich, we looked where this species was also found in Switzerland. And in all square kilometers where this species was found, we took all the other species in these square kilometers as part of a potential species pool. Of course, some would have maybe the possibility to move in a cities because they could fly, they can move, other not. So the traits will determine whether the species are filtered or not, or able to overcome this harsh condition in cities, from the dispersal, from drought resistance, from other fires, for other traits. So we will test now this type of filter, and we test this, and of course, and then we will test also another filter which inside of the cities. Once we have defined the urban species pool from the regional, we define through this mechanism which species manage to be inside. We will also see whether this mosaic can favor some species and not others, and through which traits this happens. So, and to understand these two mechanisms, we will use like traits from the literature, because I mean we are talking about thousands of species. So body size, mobility, phenology, feeding preferences, reproduction, abiotic tolerance. And we tested this with two group of taxa. One is bees, and one is carabid beetles. So for bees, the regional species pool, we had like 500 species known in Switzerland. Or let's say, when we did that, like this exercise to look in which quadrats in Switzerland the species that were sampled in Zurich occurred, then all the species in these quadrats made like 500, around 500 species. And this was like considered the regional species pool. But in Switzerland, in the Zurich, we only found 31% of this. And actually those that we found in Zurich were able to be there because they were like early active. So the arrow up means more earlier. They stayed longer in their phenology. The body size is larger. I mean, all this more or less fit with the expectation. Being larger means also, especially for bees, being able to move longer distance. More generalist. Having like a short tongue means also to be generalist, because you access to easy flowers, which are not too complex. And the nesting mode is mainly renter, so cavity. People offer a lot of cavities because they can buy these bee hotels. But mason, so more in concrete or in parasites, are rather reduced. The voltinism are polymorphs, so it means that several generations and not just one, and mainly social bees. So more or less, we see the picture of the species that manage to be an urban species, let's say. Similar to carabids, same exercise, and we have only 20% that manage to enter in the cities. And we have like a omnivore, overwinter as imagos or as adults, Macroptera, so able to fly, xerophile, so drought resistance. So all these communities, all these characteristics make a species able to survive. Okay, it seems like there is a huge filter given by these traits. Then when we move, and then, okay, this could lead like to homogenization. Or let's say, oh, in this case, all the cities are equal because there is a huge filter. But then when you look, and usually studies are concentrated in one particular type. No, there are people working only on gardens, others are interested on green roofs, others are interested on parks, and you get only a small piece of the whole pictures. So we had this chance to have all this habitat type or these urban green spaces, and we looked which contribution in terms of community wedding means or functional diversity had the different habitat type within the cities. No, we are not considering now this huge filter, which we know that it exists. And despite the functional diversity doesn't change at all, or only slightly in the two groups, but in terms of mean community weight mean of the traits, we see that each urban green space, different urban green space, contribute in a way or the other in a different way. So I mean, I don't want to go in details, but this speaks that if a city is really a mosaic, which is it is the case, once you study the urban, so city as an ecosystem, you will see that it provides diversity in terms of mean traits, mean and functions. And this, I mean, for me, this is it doesn't speak for homogenization. It's rather say, okay, there is also diversity. It's like if this will be, if you go from meadows to a forest, you will also find this kind of filtering. But once you are in the forest, depending on how diverse is the forest, you might find this differentiation, these differences. And this is also what happens in a cities. So, and then this leads me to another framework by Swan in 2011. And he distinguished like a social ecological or social economic component and an ecological component. And for the social economic component, it defined like a social investment in ecological community composition. So how much do you invest in managing your gardens? Could be nothing or very low. And these are like the brownfields versus something which is very highly managed. So where you control everything. And then, I mean, you have your regional species pool. This is the ecological component. If if you are in this part of the gradient, you can expect that the community you found in the cities is mainly driven by dispersal limitation, by environmental filter, as you would found in a semi-natural habitat. But if most in this part of the gradient, so all the urban green spaces which are highly managed, then you cannot expect these rules to be true. You will mainly find a system migration, as I said before, and environmental facilitation. So people putting together things that you would never find in nature. So, and then this self-assembly and this facilitated assembly will provide your beta diversity. I mean, these parks and brownfield and the mosaic I showed before, it showed similar things, but in a different way. I like this framework. And I mean, you could measure the alpha diversity in each of these, but all together, I mean, within your cities, considering all these urban green spaces, you will have like your beta diversity. And of course, this beta diversity will provide your ecosystem function and services. So understanding a little bit the proportion of the self-assembly community and the facilitated assembly community will provide in a city. You will provide, I mean, the more holistic view of and the mechanistic understanding of your biodiversity. So I mean, of course, you never realize these things before you start a project. But we had this project and tried to look at this project with these eyes to understand the beta and the alpha of the different components. So we had a project called Better Gardens, which is on gardens, and there was like a social component asking why people act in a way or in a different way, why they plant carrots and not flowers. This was or why they use pesticide or not. Okay, this was more the social part. And then when a gardener were acting in a certain way, they also looked what is the outcome for the gardeners. So is it happy or is it stressed? or yeah, is getting relaxed or not. Then there was like a module more on above ground biodiversity, but also ecosystem process and services, and also below ground, looking at more the quality of the soil and the processes in the soil. So we studied this in two types of gardens, which already like a social component, because if you have a private garden, means you also have a house, you might have a standard. And if you participate in an allotment, you might live in such buildings, so you don't have access to your own garden, your own greens. So, but we distributed this two type quite homogeneously in the cities. Of course, it's quite hard to find still allotment in the city centers, but there are still. But usually they removed from the city center and they leave it in the surrounding. And we had more or less 40 and 40 these two type of gardens. And then we selected two main axes, so gradients. One is the management intensity, from highly managed to low managed. So we try to stress a bit these gradients, but in between we have all the gradients. And then also the landscape scale, so the amount of silt area, impervious area within different radius, but in this case like 250 meters using LiDAR images. So you have really very nice. So these two axes were more or less orthogonal. So in order to have a not a factorial, but I mean still a gradient, but quite balanced and independent in the two axes. So then we ran, so this, oops, you can recognize these figures. So for the biodiversity above ground, we use the standard methods to sample bees and pollinators and ground dwellers. And we measure some function like pest controls, pollinators, and parasitism. And for the this in the center is like the social aspect were done with interviews or questionnaires. Asking people, I mean, also to evaluate their own biodiversity. So whether they were able to estimate the biodiversity by themselves, and many other questions. And then for soil quality was mainly physical and chemical component, also biological, and then as ecosystem process and services like leaf litter decomposition. So what we found in this 85 gardens, in terms of plants, we found more or less 1,000 species, which is quite remarkable. The mean was like the mean was around 100 species per gardens, of course, including everything. So from the horticultural exotic species to but also the local, the native one, and more or less 50% of the 1,000 species were native and 50% was exotic. I mean, I think it's very important to also consider the exotic, because these are resources for many pollinators, herbivores, and so on and so forth. And I mean, they compete, or these are part also of the social aspect. So dealing also only with the native is only one part of the cake for me. And we also found a very interesting species, very rare species. And okay, just to say that it can also host species of conservation concern. The main drivers of this plant diversity was okay. This is a bit strange. So the age was negatively driven. So it was affecting negatively the species richness. Usually, I mean, we had like other studies claiming the opposite. But the surface, of course, I mean, according to the islands theories, the larger the surface, the more species. But then interestingly is the number of habitat types. So I mean like vegetable gardens, the lawn, the flowers bed. I mean, all this, I call it habitat type. The more that they are and the more diverse, and the management intensity was affecting negatively. So the more intensive the management, the less species. And these are typically human-driven factors. Regarding invertebrates, we have also more or less 1,000 species, which is also quite nice across all these taxa. During 13 weeks, I mean, it's not like the entire season. And this is for each taxonomic group, the maximum we found, the minimum, and the average. But the most abundant, maybe also biased by the trap type of the trap we used, was pollinators, was carabid beetles, and was the true bugs, the Heteroptera. And the other was more like less abundant or less diverse. And the species region of the arthropods were like explained by the species region of the plants. And knowing that the plants, as I said before, are driven by humans, also indirectly, also the arthropod species regions, we can say that is driven by people that's deciding to plant more or less species. And also management intensity, we saw before, is like a human-driven factor. And the more intensity you manage your garden, less species richness of arthropod as well. So this sign already that we are in an ecosystem that really is where you have really to consider the social aspect. So I remember you this framework, which I liked very much. And I now will focus on this beta diversity. And maybe I just introduce how I measure beta diversity for taxonomic and functional. So in this case, if you have like two communities which are identical, these are, I mean, you don't have any beta diversity. This will be 0. Then you might have like a very high beta diversity in terms of diversity of community, in case this community contain exactly the same number of species but totally different species, and this will be called turnover. You might have also two communities which are different, but only because the second one lost some species, and of course this might also increase beta diversity, but because of loss of species, and this is called nestedness. And then you can have like all the mixture between all these two main categories. And the same is for beta functional diversity. So of course you consider the traits. If you have two traits and you have like you define your trait space, two communities could share exactly the same trait space, and they will be functional exactly similar, so identical. But then you could have like exactly the same space, but different in different parts of the gradients of the two traits. Or maybe you could have like one community which is embedded in the other, so it's like a more shrinked, more reduced compared to the other, and this will be like similar to this, like a loss of functional space. So we measure this beta diversity within our cities and across all the gardens, and keep in mind that we calculated this beta diversity is reached the value of 100 by summing the similarities, so communities which are similar and the community which are dissimilar, and then we distinguish turnover versus nestedness. So similarity plus dissimilarity will give 100, and we use this triangle to disentangle the contribution of turnover, nestedness, and similarity, these three components. So for the taxonomic beta diversity, we found that 22% of the community, I mean, the position of the single taxes is a real value. I mean, you could see that overflies are a little bit less similar, the community of overflies, and the weevils, the isopods, are more similar across all the gardens. But in the average, we have like a more or less 32% similarity in the overall communities. And from the remaining 60%, 40% is turnover. So we have a lot of turnover. Each garden contains different species than nestedness. So we don't lose species, but each garden hosts different species. In terms of functional, so we consider these traits, as I said before, we have a slightly higher similarity in terms of functions, also because we are sometimes limited in we don't have always like continuous values of traits, sometimes are categorical, and this limited a bit and makes the more likely that the community end up to be similar. And then from the 50% remaining, we have more or less the same amount is turnover and the same amount is nestedness. So these results, at least for the gardens in Zurich, do not speak for homogenization. I would say is more or less equally distributed, and in terms of taxonomic is rather like driven by turnover of species, which some of them are similar, but most of them are also dissimilar. Okay. And then, of course, we could, along the gradient, urbanization gradient, we could see how this urbanization affect beta diversity. So this is the effect of beta diversity, not the beta diversity per se. And we see that at the beginning of the urbanization gradient, where here is still relatively green, we don't have so this gradient until here doesn't affect beta at all or very little. But at a certain point, when it gets really dense, it starts to have really an effect on these communities, not for instance on snails. And this is for the total beta biodiversity. Then we can see how it affected the two different turnover. And since this is, for instance, sorry, I forgot to say this is the taxonomic diversity, and most of the effect is on the turnover. As we said, it also has like a higher component than the nestedness. And again, we found this threshold we could also measure from which point it starts to really affect beta diversity. And then we could enter here in the debate of land sharing, land sparing. At a certain point of densification, I mean, it could have an effect on the communities. Okay, but do human factors influence number of biodiversity species? So number of invertebrate species, and how? So to answer these questions, we use SDM, so structural equation modeling, and we're trying to put all these factors together to find direct and indirect effects. So at the end, we have our species richness, and then I will guide you a bit through this mess. So at the landscape level, at city level, urban intensity, so densification, play a negative role. So this will affect your species richness negatively, but all these yellow quadrats are human-driven factors. So attitude towards biodiversity was measured in terms of whether people belong to a non-governative organization, or the time they spend in the garden. These are positive attitude towards biodiversity. The more you have, the less you manage intensively your garden. And by managing less intensively, you will improve your species diversity. So the more intensive, the less negative biodiversity, but the less the less intensity your management, the more biodiversity. And okay, but then you could have also other paths that the management influence the habitat. Also, if you are keen to manage less intensively, you will also have more habitat heterogeneity, which will influence positively plant species richness, and plant species richness will influence invertebrates. So it seems like that most of the, apart this, which is quite direct, everything is mediated by human decision and human activity. The same question is like, okay, does human affect or human decision affect soil multifunctionality? So in terms of leaf litter decomposition, nutrient supply, water regulation, everything combined in this multifunctional box. And then we have like two main drivers. One is like the garden land use type. So whether I have like perennial flowers, perennial grass, or annual vegetables. And this choose, I mean, I might like flowers, or I might like only to have perennial, will have an effect. And some, like if I have only annual vegetables, so intensively, and maybe I use also pesticide, or I want to produce vegetable, this will affect negatively my soil multifunctionality. But most of the effects are like indirect and mediated by plant diversity. So if I integrate in my garden also perennial flowers, I will affect positively the plant diversity, and this will affect positively the soil multifunctionality. And or I could also, not directly but indirectly, via the fauna diversity, fauna biomass, and so on and so forth. So using this structural equation model, I can track all the possible direct and indirect effect, which is fine. But the message here is like that the decision of the people to have only one of these three, or the combination, will affect at the end my ecosystem function. And urbanization in this case doesn't really play a role at all, because maybe it's very local. So soil is very local. What happens in the soil. And management, of course. So the more intensively, the less plant diversity, the less fauna biomass. This has also an effect. But why people care about biodiversity in gardens? So is there because they are aware, or because it creates some benefit? So this was the task of a social scientist. And he measured, actually these are already the solution. I mean, it seems like if our end product is a self-reported restoration, so through questionnaire, they have to say whether when I in the garden, when I'm gardening, I feel restored from stress. This has like a component which is the perceivedness, or the perceived restorativeness. Don't ask, I mean, how to measure this, but I mean, it's not directly what is reported. There is like this, I think these are latent variables, but it seems like, or it end up to be like the more plant species you have, the more perceived restorativeness, and the more self-reported restoration. So it seems like, to answer to this question, that biodiversity affect positively what I feel to be this positive benefit for humans. And also the garden type. I mean, we have the two garden type. In this case, we have binomial, so we can take one, so allotment. So people that have an allotment, so they pay something, they go there, they also there is this component of being away. So you leave your home and you go in a different place. This also affects positively this restoration. In the opposite, if you have like if you don't have like allotment, you will have like a garden stress. So if you have allotment, your garden stress is reduced. But if you have a private gardens, your garden stress is higher. Because why? I mean, this was our interpretation. You have your garden always there. You invite someone, it will look at your garden. So you are quite stressed from the neighbor. You are not in an environment where everyone is doing the same. You are quite exotic and under control by the society. So this creates stress. Instead of allotment, will create like you really want to have a lot, and you go and you're happy. If you're not happy anymore, you give it up. You give out your lot, and you are released. Your home garden you will have always under your eyes. So these are the reason why people enjoy have more species, because it provides restoration. So, but what type of green people prefer? Do they have an idea, or is the same? So this was like a previous project called Biodiversity, and we provide people with many photo simulation manipulation. So this was the general picture. Then we manipulated the structure, the grass structure, the amount of impervious area. So quite a lot. So we provided really very many different scenarios, and we asked them really to select. And most of the people, 60%, were more keen to have like something like this. We linked this to the savanna concept. So we come from the savanna, and people like to have like some trees, not too many, and some space to look through. What they don't like is something very homogeneous. Both, I mean, it could be like with tall grass or low grass, they don't like. But usually what we found in the parks is rather this, is this. So I think, so our garden managers, public garden manager should have still to learn something. And even in Switzerland, there is still a prohibition to step into the grass. I mean, this is really ridiculous, but still. So, but this is just one type of people, one stakeholder type, one stakeholder groups, the public green managers. But then you have like the privates, which have maybe have a bit different view and preference, and they might enjoy the more stochastic or chaotic gardens. And all this together makes the richness of a cities. So the next step in my career, or what I would like to or what I just submitted, is a Synergia project. And the Synergia project in Switzerland allowed to have like really very interdisciplinary projects, and they call this PAPUS, plant and people in urban system. So actually is how human and biophysical factors jointly shape biodiversity and nature contribution to people in cities. So actually is similar to what I showed before, but in a more, when I said before, you try always to fit project that had different aim to something, to other goals. In this case, I really tried to target the goal I wanted. So I have this global species pool, which is composed by horticultural and regional species pool. And I will observe plant species richness, so urban plant species pool in cities. Then I will have like human factors and biophysical factors. And this will be like my gradient in the social investment gradient I showed before. If I don't do anything, I mean, there will be only biophysical factor driving my species selection. If I'm very, very upset and select things, it will be driven by humans. And then these are the components of the human: plant preference, planting decision, management decision. And on this side, I have a biotic filter, biotic interaction, dispersal limitation. And everything is like driven by or controlled by plant response rates. And I will have also plant effect rates affecting on one hand, I will assess interaction networks, plant pollinators and plant herbivores, and then we will have like ask people belonging to different urban green space. So what plants have as a contribution for them. And of course, this we expect that this experience in nature contribution to people will also affect back human factors. If a plant is allergenic, I won't plant it again. But if it's enjoyable, I will buy it again and plant it. So there is like a social scientist involved trying to understand all these differences in species preference. I will have like a consumer behavior understanding what are decision plants, why people having a given preference decide not to buy something or to buy. Maybe it's like also an economic aspect or other aspect. Then I will have myself trying to understand this. So from the urban plant species pool, what is the effect for other trophic levels and in terms of nature contribution to people. And then we will have like a landscape ecologist and modeling trying to put all together in a more holistic way. So this is there will be my last project of my career, and I will have like an answer in a few months. And yeah, I hope it will work. So this is what we have learned. Yes, maybe this might be interesting for you. We have like some project partners: Nicolas Mouquet from the CNRS. Terry Hartig is a famous psychologist, environmental psychologist, and Jaburi Gazul and Michael Sigrist are from the ATH. Then, so what we have learned in this nearly 1 hour. Okay. Urbanization is growing at an unprecedented rate, and we need to understand how urbanization affects biodiversity and trying to integrate it into biodiversity conservation strategies. So we have seen that integrating social and ecological aspects will allow us to improve our understanding of urban biodiversity. And that human factors play a primary role in the assemblage of species and the ecosystem functioning and services. And that by using an integrated approach based on functional traits, dealing with people select plants based on traits, and also the environment will select plants based on traits. So it seems like functional traits might be really in the center of the two stories. And using these traits, we might gain like a predictive power in understanding process like a multi-trophic cascade and the ecosystem processes. So, and with this, I'm finished. So I open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Marco, very much indeed for this excellent talk.
One can always improve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Então, quem está por aqui, quem quiser abrir o microfone, que pergunta diretamente, ou pode escrever no chat também, que a gente vai ler para o Marco. And
yes.
Time for
I keep the share screen in case someone wants to see some slides. Okay.
As you wish. We can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a question here from the YouTube, Pablo Rodriguez, and he asks, many thanks, Professor Marco. Humans are changing the evolution of the species towards the bioevolutionary Anthropocene.
Mm-hmm. Is it the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I mean, maybe this was also a missing point, but I'm not an expert, but it has been observed that this rapid evolution happens in cities. I mean, evolution was always like thought to be very slowly, and that it would never happen in a very short time. But there are now more and more evidences that species under such pressure or under such a harsh condition, they can adapt and even genetically adapt. We have seen, for instance, in 2 bumblebees, measuring individual traits on resource uptaking traits like tongue length, mobility, so the intertegular distance, and corbicular length, where they collected the pollen. I mean, I was thinking that the same filtering, the same shrinking or reducing in functional space that we observe in the community, at the community level, would also happen at the individual level. But instead, we found higher intraspecific variation in the city center compared to the rural area. And I mean, we explained this, but I mean, we don't have like evidence because we didn't collect the plants that having less resources in cities, but more diverse, it's not worse to invest in one single traits, like in the rural, all the bumblebees have long tongues. And in the city, because the flowers are all different, you might best invest in a short and long and intermediate tongues in order to use all these resources, which are scarce, but then you use them all. And we even found like a bimodal distribution, like if like a subset of the species started to differentiate from the main. Of course, there was like an allometric relationship. So in the cities, they were all smaller and all, so the tendency was to be more small. But within this smaller, there was the variation was bigger. So we were not able to say whether it's this like a plasticity or genetics. What we have still, because these individuals are in minus 20 degrees, we have the pollen. We could actually identify the pollen via barcoding and see whether this pollen is more diverse than outside, and maybe also track some traits and see whether this our hypothesis could match with the traits we measured. Yeah. So yes, I mean to answer, there is evolution going on in cities.
Yeah. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Pablo, for the question. Piatan.
Sorry, I think I was muted. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Marco. It was great. I wanted to catch up on the evolutionary question. I'm an evolutionary ecologist, so I was thinking about how do you think, considering that evolution can be really quick in cities, how do you think evolutionary processes can affect your model, the big model for your the big project, the last one? How do you think evolutionary or eco-evolutionary feedbacks could affect, for example, the ecosystem services you expect will be provided, and the plant response traits?
Good question. I mean, I haven't thought. I was so concentrated in capturing more this human aspect, which usually is not really integrated in this model. But I could imagine. I mean, maybe similar what I have explained before. If the people select plants because they like it, everyone will select different plants, different colors, different forms, different. So you might have like a huge diversity of flowers in certain gardens and maybe less in others. And I mean, I would expect rapid evolutionary or adaptation in the pollinators and herbivores, in terms that they have to deal with what is offered. So if they are really very conserved and not adaptable, I mean, they will be outcompeted and disappear. But those that remains, in order to use all this diversity, they won't be able, I mean, they will have to differentiate and to diversify it within the same species. So I could imagine that rapid evolution would lead to population that are more diverse. I mean, population, so it means within the same species. So if the same species in a pristine area or in a more rural area will have only one given traits, in cities, if they want to survive, they have to cope with all this diversity and maybe not so many resources. So they have to differentiate their population and not go in one single direction. So I don't know then how this, I mean, I know, for instance, other example like moths that outside are light sensitive and then start to be adapted or to not to be sensitive to light in cities. And so I could imagine that similar process could happen also in pollinators and herbivores, because they are forced to differentiate their preferences.
Right.
But
thank you.
More I cannot say.
So just a quick
Yeah.
question on that. So you think maybe the model you have now and the weight of each one of the factors or the variables you consider, they're structuring the plant response traits or the effect traits, maybe they can change within a couple of years as well, and then you're going to have a different pattern in terms of ecosystem services and things like that?
I mean, we will work mainly with time for space substitution. So, I mean, I won't have like the time axis.
Right.
I will have like a more, try to stress that this, but first of all, I will try to consider all possible main urban green spaces and not only target one of the others. So also to understand what happens in the head of all these stakeholders groups. And then I will try to stress that the different traits according to the preference of the people. I mean, we'll try to match the preference of the people based on the questionnaires, and to see whether this preference or this decision is also reflected in the species we really found in the realized quasi species assemblage in the gardens. And then I will try to have like a more poor species gardens or green spaces and more rich. But I don't think that this is enough to capture this temporal variation or this temporal component that you mentioned.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Beata.
But it's surely worth to investigate this evolutionary aspect. Of course, I mean, the species you lose, they cannot adapt. But those that enter, you can expect, and usually they are the more like the fox, like they are very generalist. But I'm pretty sure they start to differentiate in their way they occupy the territory, and they can digest stuff that they might not be able to eat outside. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to read a question from Gabriel Barro.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. I was wondering about the possible non-homogenization in urban areas that you have mentioned at the beginning of the lecture. Since the effects of urbanization on beta diversity was most observed in the turnover than nested net, could we then understand that homogenization is really the main impact for the study areas?
I don't know if I really understand the question, but I mean, for sure you have like an homogenization effect. If you take several cities and you compare the species diversity or species composition, sorry, and the similarity among cities, and then you compare among rural area, I can imagine that there is more homogeneous, or the species, especially the functional, the species that manage to live in the cities will be all, as I said before, all like drought resistant, or quite mobile because of the fragmentation, or quite generalist. In terms of species composition, I'm sure we won't find the same species. I mean, this was also shown in the species turnover, and I'm sure that the species I found in Paris is not the same as in Zurich, but in terms of functional component, yes. But this, I guess, I mean, and this is something that I'm trying to analyze now. If I take any ecosystem, let's take urban, meadows, or agriculture and forest. I'm sure if I go from forest to meadows, or from meadows to cities, or to city to, I mean, everyone will filter. All ecosystem will filter. So you won't find heliophilous species or sunny loving species in a dark forest, or herbaceous species in a forest. So so this filtering from one ecosystem to the other happens everywhere. Then what is important is to understand within the ecosystem, so within forest, how can I diversify the management or the structure or the age, with more senescent or less senescent forest? How can I manage in order to increase or maximize the biodiversity and the different component of biodiversity? But then this is something that you study within the forest. To understand the forest, you don't need the meadows, or you don't compare it. But often when people, or at least in the past, when people want to understand urban, they always compare with outside. For certain things, I mean, since it's a novel ecosystem, it makes sense, but it's not for judging. It's more maybe to understand the mechanism or the trajectory. So just to answer, I would say, okay, there might be homogenization, but as I would expect in any ecosystem, when you compare forest with forest and rural to rural, I can guess that rural is more diverse than forest ecosystem. Okay, but then within, we didn't find really high homogenization. Maybe because in Switzerland, all the cities are more like in the green area, in the green part of the gradient. And if you go in daily, you will also find a lot of additional homogenization. But this showed that the way that cities are not per definition a black hole, or you can manage cities in a way that it can have a lot of biodiversity and a lot of different. And of course, now our goal or our task is how to make cities more functionally permeable. So how can we manage cities in a way that also the species that now are filtered can be accessed? So through maybe water or through more fresh condition. But again, this is really in the debate of shall we sprawling the cities and then have more green, or shall we densify? So this is really a huge debate in Europe. So land sharing, like land sparing. In Switzerland, for instance, despite the increase of population is only like 10%, the increase of cities or urbanization is like more than 100%. It means that the way we live also, we need more space to live than in the past. So it's not only a matter of amount of people, it's really also the way we live.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. André?
Hi, Marco. Thanks for such a nice talk. And I thought it was quite interesting the way you're trying to put the human perceptions and actions as some kind of environmental filter for the species. And I was wondering how to really think about traits in this perspective, because of course, response traits will be always important when you're thinking about biophysical conditions, and humans' decision will alter biophysical conditions. But I think when you're thinking about perceptions and preferences, I think I was thinking if we don't need some other kinds of traits that some other dimension of traits of species that will actually trigger this preference and perception of people that not necessarily are related to response traits. So I would like to hear your opinion about this, because sometimes species can be beautiful or ugly or strange.
I was long, really, it took me long to understand this. I mean, I thought we need social or cultural traits. Okay, you can call them like this. But at the end, the definition of traits we know from biology, it doesn't change. I mean, if I select plants because of a traits that has not any link to fitness, it might not have any effect. But at the end, if the traits people, use to select or to prefer, like color of the flowers, the shape of the flowers, they like maybe the leaves are not too hard. This you can call it them cultural traits because are selected by people, preferred by people, but at the end are exactly the same traits that other trophic levels will interact with and will have an effect on the functional. So at the end, the definition of functional traits in terms of having a link with the fitness, it doesn't change. And if someone selects plants based on how would, I don't know. I couldn't, at a certain moment, I couldn't think any traits that my mom or any person would select to or would choose to select that doesn't have an effect. If I don't like a spiny species, means that I will buy something that is maybe very susceptible to herbivores. Or if I like tall plant, small plant, these are really traits. I cannot really think at any traits that people, or the architecture of the plants, but
yeah, I agree. But I was thinking if you could think about like syndromes, like the same way you would think about like ecological spectrums and ecological syndromes, you could think about some social ecological syndromes that will be based on some traits. And these some traits, of course, they will have consequence for the way the plant functions. Some will be more or less important in some case, but
I'm also, this will be one of the outcomes, I guess, no? Taking into account all the preference of the people and which traits we will see if there is some syndromes. And I'm also wondering whether this horticultural trade, already use, they know what people prefer and they offer exactly this. So it would be nice to see also with which criteria the horticultural trade used to offer these plants, no? Because they offer a lot, but not everything. So and this will be also a huge work. To track the traits of all the plants that are offered, even in Google. You could also use Google or because people also buy plants online. No, it's not only in horticultural centers. So this will be a huge work. I mean, we try to formulate some hypotheses, but I think there will be a lot of surprise. So always the same example, stupid example I did to make things understanding. I mean, if all people like red flowers in Europe, and you plant only red flowers, you won't have any pollinators in Europe, because bees do not see red. So, of course, it doesn't happen. But let's say that there is like an advertisement campaign and say, go for the red is love, and everyone buy only red. I mean, it would be a problem. So, so we will use also this feedback to maybe also address some intervention in terms that people do not, I mean, homogenize too much based on advertisement campaign or some fixed convention that some plants or some traits are better than others. Yeah. If we see that there is a problem with pollinators or with herbivores. Yeah.
Thanks, Marco.
Mm.
Thanks, Andrea and Marco. I'm going to read a question from YouTube. It's from Jerónimo Sansevero. Thanks, Professor Marco, for the great talk. How do human preference can lead to trait convergence and low functional diversity? Mm-hmm. Do you think that human diversity, cultural and social, can represent a kind of resilience for urban ecology?
Yeah, super great question. Yes, I mean, I really believe this. I mean, we could see that, but not really measured. That in the allotment gardens, we have many more species, diversity species in plants and traits, because we were more focused on the faunistic part. But and then if you see in the allotments are more cultural diverse people, no? So there are Italian, there are Spanish, there are Yugoslavian, and everyone want to bring their own herbs and vegetables from their countries, and then you have like the Swiss German that like flowers, and the Italian want to produce more vegetable. I mean, you have such diversity within a small space, and I'm sure that the cultural diversity will have a huge contribution in plant species diversity and functional diversity. Yeah, for sure. Yes, great point.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
I mean, my first reaction would be like, I mean, you know, the Switzerland is quite conservative in this concern, that they don't like foreign people. They would like, they don't want to be in Europe. And but in this term, I would say that really cultural diversity would make a huge favor to biodiversity. Mm.
Thank you, Jerónimo. Thank you, Marco.
Yeah.
Marquinhos?
Very interesting talk, Marco. Many aspects. I have a quick question or doubt. The turnover you found, was it between allotments? So does it mean that allotments, do people plant different greens or different plants in the allotments?
Mm. The analysis I show was like all together. I mean, just to because I wanted to understand cities as a whole. So where exactly this turnover come from? I don't think it will come only from the allotments. But as before, allotments might have like contribute a lot. But there are also private garden, which really, because we stress these gradients. It's not that everywhere we have like a very diverse private garden and very boring one, but we explicitly stress these gradients. But we show that if we have these gradients in terms of management intensity and structural richness, you can have like this diversity in terms of turnover. Yeah, maybe
just
needs
because
also, yeah.
Just because I associated the turnover as a change in block of species or functions, and it should be associated with a change in human or social use of the land, something that would help to understand how the turnover
it
happens.
might be due also to local legacy, no? If your garden was, especially the allotment, I mean, we know that they were placed in a former industrial area, maybe very polluted, and others, more rich gardens are more in a more safe area or with less industrial soil. I mean, I could imagine that this species is the results also of a certain given legacy of the land. Or in the periphery, I mean, dealing with cities, you have always like this overlap or confounding factors between densification. I mean, you could go in the city center and found really very highly densified and say, okay, this is my reference for highly dense cities, and I go more in the periphery, I will find more less densified cities. But at the same time, you change also the time since cities was constructed. So in the periphery, you are more in a young one. In the city center, you are maybe 1,000-year history, you know. And so, I mean, this will also influence the species, the species composition you have in place. And then, I mean, I could imagine. I mean, yeah, maybe the turnover. But I mean, if I have like a very low structural richness gardens, and the one is very highly structural rich, I could imagine that the highly structural rich gardens will host other species than the very poor one. You might claim, okay, this is nestedness. I don't know. I think, I mean, you're right that there is many more data that we can, or question that we can explore with this data than what we have done by doing this quite simple analysis or rough analysis. Yeah.
You will do it in your last project, as you meant, when it's approved.
No, but I mean, also every project we finish, we are unhappy because there are a potential of data that is not exploited. And then, yeah, suddenly you have like the lucky situation where you have like a postdoc or someone very good in statistics and can combine all these studies you have done before and reconsider some question that we have forgotten or we didn't have the time to consider before. So I hope that this data will be, I mean, they are all available because they are in some depositories anyway.
Thank you, Marquinhos and Marco. There is one question in YouTube from Carson. Carson is our student, Marco. Andrea. Thank you for the talk. I was wondering if there is any approach or discussion that tries to understand community assemblage in cities through neutral theory.
Through what?
Neutral theory.
This is a nice question. So we did once an analysis when I was in Pierre Legent's lab. Well, actually, we tested the hypothesis or the theories of the niche theories versus the neutral theories. So neutral theories was, I mean, for the niche, we had like all the variables, environmental variables, all the abiotic variables, and for the neutral was more the distance. So the more the spatial autocorrelation. So quasi, if community were more similar because of the distance, Euclidean distance. So we at the time we used like this PCNM stuff. So then if this type of variable, so more a spatial explicit variable, were explaining the community composition rather than the environmental variables, then we could say, okay, is more the neutral drive the species assemblage rather than the niche theories. And then we did like we had like a bunch of variables related to the niche and a bunch of variables related to the more the spatial explicit, and we did like a variation partitioning to see which one was explaining more. And I mean, some taxa like carabids, beetles, and so on were like mainly driven by the abiotics, so by the niche. As you can imagine, so they don't move much, so they really relied on the conditions, habitat condition in the local space. And then species like birds or like bees, very mobile, they were also quite driven by more like distance or to the next community. And the more closed community were the more similar in respect to the environmental variables you could find there, because their mobility. Yeah. So, but yes, there are possibility to test these two theories, just selecting niche habitat type of a variable and versus something that deal more with the dispersal. So, which is actually the distance from between communities.
Yeah, thank you.
And this, I mean, it's a nice way to test whether there is the stochasticity, this, which is, I mean, would be related to this neutral, or versus something. I mean, it's nice that to see that also in cities, in such a chaotic place, I mean, species still responds to environmental condition, and not just that they are everywhere without any relationship. I mean,
yeah.
This also proves that it's an ecosystem and not a chaos.
Sure.
But sometimes you have to prove this. I mean, because people say, I mean, in the 80s, 90s, ecologists were saying, no, cities is not a place where you can study ecological rules or ecological theories, because it's, I mean, it's so much driven by humans, and you found everywhere species without any connection to environmental condition, and they were really very reluctant to study it. And for this reason, I think there is an epistemological bias in the sense that they want to show this chaos by doing this transit from pristine to cities, and show that in the pristine you can explain everything, and in the cities you cannot explain everything. But I mean, they missed half of the variable, which are human.
Very nice comment. So thank you, Carson, also for the question. I think it's a bit late for you.
Yeah, we should have like
Yeah.
dinner. We are Italian origin, but not so Italian.
So I think that maybe there is no more questions in YouTube here. Does somebody wants to say anything, like a comment or something? Okay.
Just thank you, Marco, for the presentation, for a really interesting talk.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to your contribution to urban ecology. I mean,
yeah, I think we have a lot to talk about, Marco, in the near future.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we might contact you, Andrea, and maybe Nuria, in the frame of this seed money project with Maria.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Many people are saying great talk and congratulations. And so we are very glad that you took your time of your dinner to be here with us. Thank you very much, Marco.
It was really a pleasure, and thank you.
And
good luck with for the next time in the field or in at the end of this pandemic.
Sure. E, Rodrigo, você quer falar quem vai apresentar semana que vem? Ou eu? Sim.
Posso falar.
No YouTube.
Semana que vem, vou falar em português, né? Mais fácil. Semana que vem nós vamos ter a apresentação do professor Marco Costello, da Nord University, que vai falar um pouco sobre, deixa eu pegar aqui o título da palestra. Isso. Que a Núria vai passar o card dele em breve, que o título da palestra é Global Patterns of Biodiversity and Marine Biogeography. Mesmo horário, mesmo local.
Obrigada, Rodrigo. Então, acho que